Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I mean, if you look around today, we find that our landscape is changing. And as an educationist myself, I recall in my naivety, I began to focus on cognitive development and the IQ until I learned fairly recently that EQ is worth twice the IQ. I said, my gosh, what is EQ, right? And how important is it? And then just a few years ago, I read from someone who is a relationship expert who said that when a husband and wife and couples have a high EQ, they're able to deal with the marital issues with much more composure, with much more love. And the question is, do you have a high EQ? We'll find out as we engage here, alhamdulillah, our panelists. Zaida, when you hear the word EQ and emotional intelligence, I mean, how do you define it? What comes to your mind?
EQ, I'm going to start with IQ because I think if we all have conceptualize and understand what IQ is about, it's going to help us to understand why EQ is even more important. But I'm going to start with two sayings. The one is that IQ gets you hired, but EQ gets you promoted.
Okay, yeah, I like that.
The other is IQ gets you to university, but EQ helps you handle adversity. So I think if you take time to just contemplate those two sayings, you'll realize that EQ is a more holistic aspect of our intellectual existence. And you know, it's always been a pet subject of mine because being a family practitioner, I'm usually in the domain where I've got to analyze situations, I've got to try and motivate and incite people. And I do believe that metacognition is the highest form of intelligence. And that is over and above your IQ, which is the intellectual intelligence, there's the interpersonal element. And that is your ability to socially interact with people. And then there's the intrapersonal. And that is our ability, the ability of the individual to introspect. And the interpersonal and the intrapersonal gives you your metacognitive ability, and that is what develops your EQ. I think I'm going to, give the rest of the floor.
I know, I was smiling. For me, this was nostalgic, for the last time. But Allah bless you for that, really. I mean, it's a very, very comprehensive discussion. I like it.
I'm in the medical fraternity, and, these are subjects that come up pretty regularly because in how we deal with day-to-day situations and how we try and alleviate pain, you try and infuse understanding into scenarios that people go through in their day-to-day lives. It's important that we understand this aspect. So I think that's why I took time to explain my perception of it, but I'm going to leave our other two speakers to discuss it.
What a relief,
I may have, I think I may have tools that I could offer parents, to ensure that, when children are young, it's important that we emphasize certain aspects of their development to help them become emotionally mature individuals so that when they engage both in the context of a relationship and in a working environment, it's the emotional element that allows them to succeed over and above the intellectual resources that they come with.
MashaAllah. Hussein?
Idris, Assalamu alaikum.
Salam.
For me, I came across the concept of EQ and the notion of it around sports and high performance sport. And I think Zaida will probably be able to relate to that because I know, just chatting to her daughter, is also playing at quite a serious level, tennis. So, but when you get to a certain level, the successful individuals in any field, and I'm talking now sport, but it relates to life in general as well, are those with a better EQ. And EQ is how do we handle our thoughts, our emotions, our feelings, because that a lot of how we tackle that, how we identify it, how we relate to it, will determine the outcome, whether we're successful in life, or whether we're happy, whether we're content, whether we're fulfilled in life. And alternatively, if we don't, so for example, if we bottle it up, if we fight our emotions, if we fight our emotions like fear, for example, that's just one example. If you fight it, if you avoid it, can lead to negative emotions. And that has an impact on, you mentioned it, marriages, relationships, even if you're a professional athlete or sportsman, or in the business field or as a career.
Okay, Hasina.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My take on emotional intelligence comes from the perspective of childhood. And I think a lot of what we learn, so it's learned behavior. And we have to go back to the roots to find out, well, what are the starting points of that children have in the name of an emotional skill set by their significant others, their parents and their teachers and so forth. And so we are constantly giving children messages on how to feel, how to think, how to connect to each other. So emotional intelligence at that very early stage, for example, if you look at infancy, there's a lot around contentment and distress, for example. And so when the mother responds to a child, in the responsiveness comes certain kinds of connectedness to this child that says, oh, this is positive or that is negative and so forth. So early socialization and the domain of emotional development is of critical importance for the holistic development of children. And I deal with that in terms of, from a research perspective, but also from the way in which teachers are trained for early childhood. That's my area of specialization. And I have to say that we're starting to see this critical shift from just looking at the head intelligence to the education of the heart. And of course the soul as well. And for us as Muslims, the body, mind, soul kind of connection is very, very important. So just as an introduction, I think that the focus on emotional intelligence is something that hasn't and widespread hasn't been receiving the adequate attention, and there's a kind of a misnomer around some of the things that form the content of this kind of education.
But you know what, alhamdulillah, I like what all of you have said. There may be someone sitting at home thinking, well, you know what, as some people have said that EQ is being smart about your emotions. Now, does it mean that when you're going through a negative emotion, let us say, for example, on a practical level, the husband and wife, the husband is upset. I saw two ladies here changing. So, the husband, I know where my audience is. I would say, as much I can rely on you, I don't take a chance, right? For example, this is the whole thing, right? Let us say the husband and the wife, and the anyway, and the husband or the wife. Say the wife is upset with the husband, right? He's upset with the husband. Does it mean that she has a high EQ? Does it mean she does not have to show that she's upset? How should he show it? Because I know, and I tell people, sometimes they get a shock of their life. I'll tell someone, I'm very angry. Hey, they get a shock, man. I'm not screaming. Do I have to scream and say, I'm very angry? You know what I'm saying? So how do people handle those emotions, those negative emotions? How should they handle it? Because often it is how you express those emotions that can really exacerbate the problem. Zaida?
I think, what you've brought up, Uncle Idris, is a very, very important fact, especially with emotional intelligence, because as we evolve as human beings, if you take a child at the age of 2, all they do is say no, 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 because, the world is their nucleus. As they get older, by the age of 5, they start asking why, because they're thinking more. But it's important for us to evolve beyond that stage of egocentricity. Now, when you grow beyond that, when you are willing to be flexible and to be resilient, that is an indication of controlled thinking. And that is when the emotional intelligence, or the concept of emotional intelligence, kicks in, because you're not only taking yourself into the equation, you're willing to listen, and you're willing to accommodate. And I think if that's how you're able to handle situations, if Hussein spoke about sport, you'll find that usually in choosing a captain, it's usually not the best player on the team.
Yes.
It's often the one with the highest emotional quotient or the emotional intelligence, because they know that it's got to be someone who under adverse circumstances can still pull things together, So even in the context of a marriage, it's important to verbalize it. I'm really angry about the situation, but in the same token, it's important to take the other's view on why. So impulsivity and knee-jerk reactions is usually an indication of, someone who's inflexible and not willing to look at others' point of view.
So Zaida, that's a point. The point that you are making is not only about you, emotional intelligence being self-aware, but also being aware of the other. And that's a critical thing. Many of us say, I'm glad I said what I want to say. So there you have it. This is the introduction to this topic. Inshallah, I pray that each one of us begins to reflect, because one of the most beautiful things is to have a harmonious relationship with the other. And harmony does not mean that you and your partner have to agree on everything. You can disagree, but you don't have to be disagreeable.
Time is